Hello and welcome. I'm Jason L. Jones and you're watching Head to Head with UATV. Today we're talking about an international campaign called the 16 Days of Activism against gender-based violence. This is an annual campaign during which millions of people call to end violence against girls and women. To talk more about the importance of this initiative, we are joined in the studio by Oksana Pokalchook, Executive Director of Amnesty International Ukraine. Hello, Oksana. Thank you for joining us today. So, the initiative has been going since 1991, exactly. Right? Initially started by the, by the Women's Global Leadership Institute. And the campaign takes place each year from November 25th to December 10th. When did Ukraine join the campaign?
So as far as I know, Ukraine started and joined the campaign in 2001 by different initiatives. And since 2001, every year, more and more organizations are joining this campaign and do different activities all around the country. That's really something important because previously, of course, most activities had been organized only in big cities and, of course, in the capital of Ukraine. But for now, we see that even small villages, sometimes, they are open to join this campaign.
Okay, great. And 16 days, why 16 days? Like how many kind of initiatives are organized in Ukraine?
So, I mean, in general, 16 days means that each day is about something different, because when we're talking about gender-based violence, it's not one exact topic. It's like a different forms of violence that causes, of course, injuries and deaths and a lot of problems for women and girls. And each day is about different forms of violence. And in Ukraine, I mean, different organizations, of course, do different, and I cannot say in general that like only two topics are the most important, but as far as I know, for now, most organizations are focusing on domestic violence and on the prevention and of the domestic violence and fight against the domestic violence in Ukraine.
And has it been popular?
That's always, you know, gender-based violence and domestic violence. It's something about the relation mostly between women and men. And of course, I mean, between women, we can see more interest, I would say, and they're more open to listen. Because I think that, I mean, it is clear that women and girls, that they are suffering from this. But the other side of our society is the men, and we see that a lot of men, they are not opposing, but they are like laughing from it. They are not taking it seriously. They always saying like, but she was, it's her fault that it happened, when you talk about some particular case. And is it popular? I cannot answer you. Like, it becoming more visible and more people in Ukraine joining this campaign and getting more knowledge about what does it mean, gender-based violence or domestic violence. But on the other hand, we see that more and more people, and mostly, I'm sorry about this, men who are becoming more outspoken about that it's not true, that statistic is lying, that, you know, she was, it was her fault and all these things.
That's unfortunate. And I'm curious to know if you know of which countries and regions are have ranked the highest on the in gender-based violence, and then where Ukraine stands in that.
You mean in the EU? Or in Europe or in the world?
Yeah, I mean,
That's a very tricky question. And I'm sorry, but my answer will be long too.
Okay.
So the problem is that, I mean, so when we will look on the statistic, I will not be surprised if like Nordic countries, like, I mean, Sweden, Norway, I mean, the Netherlands, they will show like crazy bad statistic about the domestic violence. But it's just because these countries are open to collect this data and they work to prevent and to fight against domestic violence for so many years that it's possible now for them to collect this data. And when we're talking about Ukraine or Russia or Turkey or, I don't know, Indonesia or, I don't know, Cuba, it's just impossible to collect this data. All that we know, like mostly, like what human rights defenders are mostly doing, we first of all collect information from the police. And it's a good thing if police even have this data, because in most countries they just don't have this data at all. But even they have, it's mostly like it's women who were in the, or girls who were in such a bad situation that she decided to apply to police and to report about the situation. And I mean, so it's like a so small number of people who were, I mean, whose stories we can now see in the, I mean, in the police reporting. So, and all other are just hidden.
And would you say, where do you think Ukraine falls in that like list, or do you think there's a, does it rank against other neighboring countries or whatnot?
I think that, I mean, we of course have this patriarchal country, patriarchal system, and it's something very common for Eastern Europe and Central Asia, of course, region, on one hand. But on the other hand, in Ukraine, we have some special situation because of the armed conflict on the eastern part of Ukraine and situation in Crimea, I mean, the illegal annexation. And we have so many IDPs, I mean, the people who are living in the conditions that, how to say it correctly, you know, in conditions that can cause some physical, I mean, financial, of course, and at the end, some psychological things, stresses, yes, that might cause the level of domestic violence, I mean, that it can increase. We now working on our report about the gender-based violence on the eastern part of Ukraine. So we had a couple of missions into the eastern part of Ukraine, and we collected data there. We interviewed many people, women, girls, police, different. And soon we are going to issue this report once it will be ready. But for now, I can say, of course, that militarization of culture, of the environment that women and girls and, of course, men are living in, it influence on the situation with domestic violence.
Definitely, definitely. And kind of linking to that, so there's a staggering 33% of women who have experienced physical or sexual abuse in their lifetime. How many forms of gender-based violence do exist?
Oh. So, of course, first and the most visible, it's physical violence. It's about, physical harm that one person can do to other person. But of course, it's psychological violence. It means that person can refuse other person to go out from home or check in his or her mails, phones, whatever. It's financial violence, of course, because taking money from your intimate partner or husband, wife, or controlling financial situation of his or her partner, it's something that crucial and important, and many, many others. I mean, so it can be. So when you're talking about gender-based violence, it's always about complex situation. At the end, we will see that one person wants to keep under control other person in different forms and in a different ways. And at the end, we see the picture when one person just controlling other person.
Okay, okay. And how widespread do you think is, gender-based violence is in Ukraine, and what can be done to, I guess, counteract it other than just sharing information?
I do believe that in Ukraine, the gender-based violence is quite widespread, but the problem is that most of people have no idea that it is violence, that what they are experiencing is a violence. A lot of women we are interviewing during our researches or our just everyday work, when they're talking about their situation, like, we see that they tolerated violence against them. And to be honestly, I do believe that it's because they don't ever have been seen any other form of living together. So we're talking about their parents or just environment they're living in. And that's that's important, because when we, once again, when we look at the statistic that, for example, can show for us national police in Ukraine, they will show some data, some information about how many cases that was. But the problem is that most of cases never had been reported. That's important thing. And why it's important to do this campaign, like 16 days against violence, and why it's important to talk about violence at all, because it's, for us, it's an opportunity. I mean, the way how we can share to information what is not acceptable in the romantic or family life to those who are suffering now. That's important thing. And I do believe that we don't have, be honestly, any other ways of sharing this information. So the only thing that we can do is to speak from television, from radio, from all these media ways of talking, because it is, of course, important to go on the ground and to speak to women communities. But when person suffering from domestic violence, and when it's like listed for a long time, there might be a situation when person will be just, will not have any opportunity to talk to someone or to join this meeting on the ground. For example, we sometimes do lectures or meetings in the villages or in small communities, and women are coming who can come, but there are a lot of their friends and sisters who cannot come because they are controlling by their intimate partners.
And so that kind of leads me to another question is, what's the prosecution like, the standards in Ukraine towards gender-based violence? And is there a support system for the women?
So formally, yes. So the good thing is that this year, in the 1st January this year, one of the best laws in Europe, Western, Eastern, and Central Asia was adopted in Ukraine. It was adopted before, but it came into force on the 1st of January this year. And it's really good. It's really good that how it's written. The only issue is that this law was developed to introduce Istanbul Convention into national legislation. But the problem is that, I don't know if you know, but previous year our government refused to ratify Istanbul Convention. I just want to remind you the Istanbul Convention is a convention against domestic violence, one of the best, I would say, international document that were ever developed in the area of domestic violence. And so this law was the part of integration, their principles to the national legislation. And for now, it was a little bit cutted because a convention wasn't ratified, but it's good. In general, it's good. The problem is that after each law is adopted, you need to integrate it deeply. You need to do mechanisms and instructions to each policeman, woman, police person in this country, and it's like a big chunk of work, to be honest. So what we see now that, in accordance with law, is much better than it was before. It's good, but we need now to work on with police and with municipal authorities to make it work as it should.
Okay. And are there any support organizations for women who are facing abuse and whatnot?
In Ukraine, even.
In Ukraine.
Yeah, there are a couple of course, we have these big international organizations like UN Women, UN et al. We have La Strada Ukraine, of course, they're like a big organization that working to prevent domestic violence for many years in Ukraine. But what I see now is that more and more local women organizations becoming more visible, more outspoken, and that's really good. What we see, like before, it was they mostly were on the western part of Ukraine. That was Lviv, Ternopil, some other cities. But now we see that these organizations like this becoming very openly started more openly talk about domestic violence and help, giving like particular real help to women in a central part of Ukraine, on the south, and now we see on the east, and that's something amazing.
Awesome. So, so since you talked about a lot of different advances that have been made over the years and what you've been seeing. So since the organization's inception in 1991, there have been 6,000 organizations from approximately 187 countries involved with the campaign. What have you seen from year to year? Like, what are some of the major other advances that you've seen, not just maybe in Ukraine recently, but in other countries? And what things could possibly be adopted that other countries are implementing that could be adopted here to help counteract this issue?
You mean in general? So how how work of this organization influencing the general in this situation? I will answer very simply. Me too. Me too. That's one of the results of this campaign. So more and more women getting knowledge about that it's not okay to suffering from violence, and at the end we see this hashtag Me Too, and it's kind of a movement now, international movement, that women are outspoken and they are openly talk about the violence that they are suffering, or they know about the violence that have been suffering their sisters, mothers, whatever, and that's the result. I think that's one of the best results that we ever can expect. Okay. Because when you're talking about the laws, it's something important, yes. But the most, I think, much more important is when society knows about what they should do in the situation, and the first thing that it's not acceptable. And in Ukraine, what I would say is that I want to see more women on the street on the 8th March. I want to see more women and men who participated in the 16 Days Against Violence. In our country, still, activism at all is not so popular. So most of people here see activism as a part of like volunteering activity about the armed conflict on the eastern part of Ukraine, or some charity. So we have like in our minds in Ukraine, we have these two options. But there is a third one, and it's like activism on a different things that are important to the person. And I want to see more people in this country who will actively protect and support their ideas, if of course they are not violent. Yeah,
truly true. And are there any organizations? You talk about March 8th, International Women's Day. Are you partnering with any organizations for that day or anything, for any initiative, since there'll be so much focus on women?
Yeah, Amnesty in Ukraine participating in 8th March, started to participate, I think, 3 years ago. And since that time, we participating all the time. Each year we participating. And previous year, for example, we organized 8th March in Uzhgorod. Why in Uzhgorod? I just want to remind you that it was in Kyiv this year. It was the biggest women's march on the 8th March. But Amnesty decides to support 8th March in Uzhgorod. Why? Because 2 years ago, it's already 3 years ago, so 2 years before this 8th March, local young women wanted to go on the street and say something about women's rights on the 8th March. And they were attacked 2 years, for 2 years, by far-right groups that are, person who maybe they are not far-right, that I would think that maybe I said too judging, but people who are supporting ideas that might be seen as that are not supporting human rights.
Gotcha.
I would say this way better. And and one of our activists who had been living in Uzhgorod, she got a chemical burn on her eye because of this attack. And we started our campaign to support her application to the police, and we advocating for investigation in this case, and it's already 2 years from the moment that this application was we started this process, and still, of course, we don't see any proper investigation in this case, and that's why we decided this year that we will do it in Uzhgorod, and that was something amazing because what I saw that, of course, the young women came there, but I was really surprised, and it was something that motivates you work more on the human rights, is that a lot of not young women came to support us.
That's good. Thank you so much for your time, Oksana. That was Oksana Pokalchook, Executive Director of Amnesty International Ukraine. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned to UATV.